All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Joseph Reid. I appreciate you coming on the show today. We've been in contact for a little while. So, first of all, thank you for coming on to the Left of Greg podcast.
Yeah, it's a total honor to be here, guys.
Aw.
It's a great honor.
Well, thank
Stop,
you.
stop, because now we can stop recording and just print that.
Yes, we're
Joe,
done.
Joe, you've done what we need you
Mix
to
it,
do.
print it, we're good.
So, everyone just kind of heard like a real brief intro of you, and I kind of want to first let's start with why are you on this podcast? I guess how did you end up here? Because you're another arena introduction, but I'll
Yeah.
give you I'll let you kind of explain that connection.
Yeah, so I don't know if I have a really great answer for that. Like I did the arena podcast and something about my story, and I honestly have no idea what, other than I was in law enforcement and I work with law enforcement, that made my story stick out to her to be able to share it with you. And she's just doing fantastic things right now herself. And yeah, it's it's arena thing, and for me it's a God thing, like just how my story began in law enforcement back in '96, and what has become of that limited experience is pretty freaking amazing.
Yeah. So and that's kind of I'd love to kind of you went there. So let's start right there. I know you had like sort of a brief time in law enforcement back, like you said, in '96. And then
and let me add to that, 1096 is the code for a nutcase, a mental case, just so you know, Joe. So everything you say after this point is going to be absolutely wonderful, buddy.
I'm taking notes.
Right on
1096.
Exactly.
So that was a few years ago in 1996, but then you've kind of sort of come full circle on that in a sense. Sure. that you're actually work with some law enforcement and first responders and folks in that area. I guess it encompasses some more people, but that will give it that general definition. And then you're doing that now, which probably you didn't think that would be happening. So you kind of explain to us what it is, how that happened from 96 till now, what you have going on, and in a 1 hour episode here. We'll just knock that out real quick.
Sure, let's just throw it out there.
Yeah,
you had me at hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. So '94, I graduated from high school, and I'm like, what's the best way to pick up chicks? Like, I'm gonna put on a badge and uniform, and I'm gonna get girlfriends and all this stuff. But and why that was such a big deal for me is I grew up in a conservative home in Taylor, Michigan, east side of Michigan, and just Christian school, church 4 times a week. And I had this passion to help people. So I thought, what better place to be than in law enforcement to have that platform to help people. So I go through Henry Ford Community College. I graduate with my associates in law enforcement, go to a now defunct Flint Police Academy, and graduate 1197. Shortly thereafter, I get hired for like 3 days by Flushing Township, little township just outside of Flint. And they heard that Grand Rapids wanted to hire me, and they were only going to hire me part-time. So they're like, this is a much better deal for you. And I'd never heard of Grand Rapids. Like, I'm in Detroit, that's the world, that's the center of Michigan over there. So I get over here, I take a test with 2,000 applicants. They select 11 of us, and I'm the only one that's fresh out of the academy. We got officers from Detroit, Saginaw, some others like St. Joe's, and I'm the newbie. And I get brought in, and what I tell officers now is I think I was a police officer for a week. I worked for Grand Rapids Police Department for a month, but I'm pretty sure I kind of was a cop for a week. And that's a great segue into just kind of relating to officers and the mental health journey that I've been on, and the mental health journey that I hope to encourage our first responders to be on as well. That's the nutshell of it.
No, that was a pretty good flash to bang explanation there. You nailed that in just like a minute or two. That was really good. I'm sorry, Greg. I know you probably wanted to.
No. So I'm writing down the ironic things. First of all, the guy's name is Andy Serkis. So folks, look up Andy Serkis, doppelganger. Joe, again, a compliment. His stuff is really good. And the funny thing was, as soon as you started talking, Joe, I was thinking of the Andy Griffith Show with Ernest T. Bass. He wanted to get his girlfriend Romina. So what does he do? He decides that he has to have a uniform to get her.
Yep.
So listen, that's wonderful. What was it like realizing that now you had made one of the hardest decisions in your life and it wasn't going the direction that you had planned? What did that feel like?
Which part are you referring
Well,
to?
think about it. If you're just coming out of high school, you've got all of this head of steam built up. You get into the police academy, you're graduating out ahead of other people, and now all of a sudden you're sitting there with the badge and the gun, and maybe it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be at that point.
Right. Yeah, I didn't get to help old ladies across the street or play ball with the kids on the midnight shift in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's not the opportunity I was afforded. It was shortly after that when I traveled to Kosovo, and I spent a couple of weeks in Kosovo in Pristina and Mitrovic, and it was K4 was there. They were just cleaning up everything, and they still had issues. There was a bombing of a hotel about 2 miles from where we were staying. And I just remember seeing, after coming out of the trauma of pouring my life into law enforcement and wanting to only do that, and my wife being all on board, when she married me, she said there's only two people she's not going to marry, a pastor and a police officer. And I ended up being both at some point in our marriage. So that'll teach her to say what she's not and is going to do. So coming out of law enforcement, my wife was devastated. She was heartbroken. We were stuck in a community. We didn't know anybody. I get an opportunity to travel to Kosovo to do what I wanted to do in law enforcement and just help kids and be a role model. Excuse me. And to see the devastation of a war-torn nation like that with winter happening. This is August of 2001. We all know what happened in September of 2001. George Bush is flying into Kosovo, in the capital, as we're leaving the capital of Kosovo. And that just tore me apart. The fact that the devastation was so thorough is the only word I can think of. And the winters out there are horrible. And I couldn't do nothing about it. Me and my privileged white middle-class guy self, I just couldn't do anything. And I came back wrecked and ended up in the hospital for 2 weeks after the fact of that, the police experience, then Kosovo, and then right into the hospital. I needed that safe space to land, to kind of regroup.
Yeah, no, that's a lot. So at that time, kind of like put us in your head, where you were at back then. You know what I mean? What do you mean? You say like, dude, I ended up in the hospital. Like, this was so overwhelming. I'm assuming everything that you saw, but like, what was it about? I mean, because I loved your kind of you hit on two deep things when you said, oh, I want to become a cop because, hey, I want to wear a uniform and pick up chicks. Okay. So that's one, that's total normal, like, way of guy thinking at that age. Like, hey, how do I impress a girl? You know what I mean?
Right.
But, you immediately followed that with, hey, I wanted to help people. So you obviously, probably from your upbringing too, you had this, this call to service, serve others in some way. And you're also just like a normal dude at that age who's thinking like, hey, I want to impress some chicks. But that's like so many people, whether that's guy or girls or whatever, like that there's a lot of people that think that, and then can become disillusioned or have different traumatic experiences or things happen. So like to come from that, you go and you're doing the service, in Kosovo, and then you become overwhelmed. So kind of, explain like how does that happen, or how did it work for you? What was it about it?
Yeah, it was just this. I remember standing on a slab of cement where a house used to be, where a family of, I think it was 6 or 8 kids they had, and they were just living in tents. And I looked across the street, and all the windows are blown out from the house across the street, and there's kids looking at me from there, and their clothes are tattered, and there's tanks driving down the street, and I'm just like, this is like way out of my, like, how does somebody with a passion to help even start with something like this? So I come home from that experience just completely like questioning my faith and wondering, what the F am I doing? What could I possibly do to make any dent in this insane world that we live in. And I came home and I just started to journal, and I started to internalize the struggle I had, and I was doing a lot of just trying to convince myself to end my life. I drew a lot of graphic suicide pictures of myself that my wife ended up finding a few months later. And she's like, I got home from FedEx where I worked. I started working there in '98. And she's like, nope, this isn't going to keep going. I'm going to get rid of your gun and you're going to the hospital tonight. And if you don't go willingly, I'm going to have the cops come and take you. And that was this is something, mental illness is something I've been dealing with since second grade. We didn't know back in 1982, 83 that it was a mental illness. It was something to pray about, something to kind of muscle through, and it came to a head, and my wife was like, it's not going any further than this. And when I went in the first went in the hospital before they drugged the daylights out of me, I just tried to help people. I was trying to be the usher, the assistant, and all of that stuff. I had all my college textbooks with me so I could do some studying, and it wasn't until they knocked me flat on my butt with a bunch of Klonopins, Xanax, Paxil, I don't remember all of the fun stuff, where I literally lost 7 days of my life. I don't remember from being in there. To some of the trauma, the PTSD I resulted from some of the things that happened in the hospital that made me never want to go back.
So let's talk about that for a minute. So
a lot.
I'm an avid reader, and a couple of the books I go back to over and over, Tawapu, Taya Piglet. These are good books to ground me when I'm not right. So I would give this episode, based on those books, what I call the Tigger warning. And then for any of our readers or listeners, the trigger warning, because you said you grew up with mental health issues, and clearly they latched on and followed you all the way till today, right? Yes. And when we take a look and see you as a disciplined scientist, it's obvious that you're an emoter because you wear your emotions on your sleeve just like I do. And that comes with a huge toll on your emotional intelligence, because you see people for what they could be. You see situations for what they might be. If, just everybody else could see things like you could, everything would be okay. If you understood, that, listen, people just see it through my eyes. You're almost there. You could make this work. All these things that I could help you prop up. Hand me that 2x4, get that bucket and we'll chip in. And you know what? Time and time and time again, people and the world disappoint me. So instead of coming in grumbly and shitty and unhappy at work or at play, what I do is I eat all that emotion. I carry it with me every single day, like Jacob Marley, in the Dickensian novel, Scrooge, and I drag it behind me silently the whole time. So that's a lot of hate, death, and fear to bear on one human being. How did you, and I think I know the answer, but how did you finally come to grips with looking at another human, because we're both broken humans. As a matter of fact, everybody on this call is a broken human. That's the one thing when you talk about being broken, come up, we all get it. How did you find that one human that you could look in the eye and go, look, I'm not coping well with this. Something has to happen. Do you remember that epiphany moment? When was that? Because I think that'll help other people understand, look, you're not out there in orbit somewhere so different from the rest of us. We all have these feelings, right? Yeah. It's just with some of us, they manifest themselves in a different way. So is that a clear enough question, Joe? I want to make sure I don't set you up. Sure. Who was that person? How did that happen?
Yeah, sure. So that I would love to say that person was my wife.
Right.
Who confronted me. I'd love to say it was my best friend, Nathan Beals, who was our worship pastor, who died due to mental illness that really kind of catapulted me forward. But honestly, it was me, like looking in the mirror saying, finally admitting to myself and looking myself in the eye and saying, hey, you got issues. and you need to take steps. Because I think oftentimes in my story, in my internal dialogue, I don't trust myself. I don't believe that the solutions that I think might work are actually worth a damn. But then it's like, who else am I going to trust if I can't trust me?
Right.
So I took this principle of Jesus that he talked about, one of the greatest commandments, love your neighbor as yourself, where Jesus sets the bar for our capacity to love others by how well we love ourselves. And I spent a lot of time praying. I spent a lot of time thinking about that and how much I want to love other people and be present with those people. And I got to remind myself that I'm limited by the way and the effort that I give in taking care and loving and caring for myself. So it really did come down to, and I feel extremely, I feel a tinge of guilt for saying it was me, because I'm dealing with this self-ego thing right now as part of my mental health struggle. But I think it comes to realization where when we can be honest with ourselves that there is a struggle, like that's one of the first steps in the right direction. And how do you get to somewhere if you
Right.
can't even admit where you are?
That's a huge point. I mean, you brought up some really several good points there, but what you're talking about is knowing where you're at right then and there.
Right.
So you were able to come to a pretty quick realization after this one trip, let's say, not a quick realization, but it was, let's say, some triggering moment or something that brought a lot of things to the surface that were already there. And I say it that way because you look at everything over just in the United States in the last couple of years with COVID and supply chain issues and all of these other things that happen, and these lockdowns and mandates and this and that, but and everyone's having a difficult time dealing with it. And I think it's because all of those issues were already there. We just never had any pressure applied to us at such a scale as this, right?
Right.
Where everywhere we turned, we had to deal with it. Then all this huge political rhetoric going on in our country, where everyone is at a point where they're fed up. They're just fed up. You know what I mean? They're like, I've had enough. That was we like to use the term, the glass is full, man. Well, that's not good. Especially if you already have some other underlying condition. So that's hard enough for someone who's, let's say, clinically normal or has the ability to deal with this, but then you've had all of these other experiences or some other underlying conditions. It gets that much harder. And so for you to, I don't think it's an ego thing to say, well, I came to this realization myself. I'd say, that's it has to happen for everyone in some way. So sometimes it might take an event or a person stepping in but it has to happen with you realizing that has to go, holy crap, where am I at right now? I didn't even realize how far down the rabbit hole I had traveled. I didn't realize how far off center I was. I had no idea where I was at, because we lack perspective in our daily lives,
Yeah.
And if you don't sit around and talk, because especially like Greg and I will get, because we get so intense about some of the work that we do and things that we have going on. And man, like, we're like so close to like all of these like, I don't even know, like half a dozen big things happening. And when you're clawing at it, we're like, God, we could have done that better and start beating. And it takes Shelly, our CEO, to go, do that. Hey, don't forget to celebrate the small wins. And we have to sit there like just we did last week and have a meal and go, holy crap, we're in Bogota, Colombia right now, doing what we love
for a second
doing.
time in a month.
Yeah, second time in a month,
which
doing
is
what
just
we're doing. Like,
amazing.
we just
right?
lose the fact that because we're so used to doing it and getting them go, we're like, dude, someone has flown us to Bogota, Colombia to talk and to hear what we think and see how we approach things. Like, holy crap, that's really, really effing incredible. But 5 minutes before that, we're both stressed out and we're MF that guy and writing notes on this. We got to change this and make sure we do this. So I want to, when you say that, like, hey, it's kind of work on an ego thing. Well, look, as we say, all humans have have an ecosystem on board, right? We think we're the smartest, or we think we're the best. We think we know what we're doing. Hey, we got this. And then in the opposite directions, no matter what happens to us, it's always the worst thing in the world. It's never happened to anyone before in the history of humans. So we have that very self-centered view for survival purposes, right? If we're hardwired that way, it needs to happen. But coming to that realization is a big deal. And that's all about perspective, right? Or I think it's about perspective, and gaining that perspective to be able to try and, take a step outside of where you're at and look at it, in the clear light of day. It's really difficult to do. And like you said, it's a struggle. It's something not, oh, I see now, I got it. It's no, I see where I need to improve, and now I got to work for the rest of my life to try and improve it. I mean, that's I mean, do you kind of see it the same way? I know you describe it a little bit differently, so I'd love to hear kind of your description of what that's like.
Yeah, you just said an awful lot.
Sorry. Yeah.
A couple things that come to my mind is just the artist's perspective and taking a step back. But I think it was really important, and even as I demonstrated here just a second ago, and you brought up so eloquently, is that feelings lie. And I think feelings are, the things that you tell yourself about yourself quite often are just BS. And until you can, and this is why I think therapy is so great, because it helps you. Because what are you doing in therapy? You're really just talking to yourself, right? You're just paying somebody so you can talk well to yourself, and it's just expensive. But I think it creates a safe space to do that, and training to do that, and to be kind to yourself. Because one thing I notice quite frequently right now is, I'm just coaching myself all day long out loud. Like, hey, Joe, just take it easy here. And if we can, because a lot of times the internal voices, what I call an internal voice, is ugly, sarcastic, and just rude, and it just beats the crap out of you. But if I can counter that internal voice with my external conscious cognitive voice and say, screw you, I'm worth it, then that has much more of an impact, because number one, I'm being intentional. Number two, it involves both my lips, my words that come from the right or left side of my brain to hit impacting my ears, so I'm hearing it too. And I'm just demonstrating healthy living. I do want to touch on one other thing too, because how do you, when you're in the middle of that place where your feelings are lying to you, how do you get through that? And that's why I wrote my book. That's what my book is all about, Broken Like Me. So the way I picture it is, if you're in an emotional crisis, it's like you're in a monsoon storm thing going on. You're traveling down the road, and imagine driving down the road. You got your Mercedes or whatever you drive, Greg. It's a Porsche, or some kind of rocket ship, and you hit that storm, and you got to let your foot off the accelerator, and if you run out of gas or your foot's off the accelerator, you're only going to go so far until you're stuck in that storm and you can go no further. But what I've tried to do, and what I continue to do really on a day-to-day basis, because it really is a day-to-day fight, because I think the small steps are the big steps. The small steps, the small things we do are really the big deal. Mm-hmm. But I try to bring people along in that journey with me that can, well, first of all, try to build up enough momentum by making good decisions when I'm not in that storm, seeing a therapist, taking my medications, eating healthy, going to the gym, so that when I hit that storm of emotion, that I'm at a good pace. But then there are things that I know I can't make it all the way through by myself. So I have my friends that come along, and they jump out of the car and they start to push that vehicle. There are things that I do that will carry me the rest of the way through the storm, the west, maybe I'm hanging westbound. The rest of the way through that storm, so that when I get through there, I'm all damp and I'm wet and I'm flustered, but I see what happened, and I'm encouraged by the people that help carry me through that. Like footprints in the sand, Jesus carrying somebody, but I've got these things like my journal and my the way I do friendship, and a scale I created to help me be able to communicate with my friends, so that I can tell them, hey, maybe you don't realize this, but I'm in an emotional storm. I need you to get out of the vehicle and help me.
Yep.
That's so this kind all of this kind of lead you, because you started talking about it, so let's just jump into it right now, is your book and kind of how to manage and do all that stuff. Like you said, I like how you put it, the little steps are the big, that's the big steps, that's
Right.
what you have to focus on. Is we forget about that sometimes. It's literally focusing on the little things, because those little things add up to really, really big things. But you wrote the book, and one, it's called Broken Like Me, an insider's toolkit for mending broken people. So love the title, Broken Like Me. Greg and I use the term broken. We're all a bunch of broken human beings. We use that talking about ourselves and all people. Everyone has their stress fractures or things. I don't care who you are. Everyone's got something, no matter how well you're doing. But then you call it, an insider's toolkit for mending broken people. Well, I like the idea of a toolkit, because it sounds like, hey, it's got a bunch of stuff that I can literally use to fix something. So
Right.
what are your one, I know idea, I have an idea what your goal is with the book. You probably just want to, help someone, save one person's life, whatever. But what were those things that are in the toolkit that you find so important? You can either pick one thing from the toolkit you talk about in the book and expand on that, or a whole bunch of stuff. But I kind of want to throw it to you for what really, really worked best for you, or you've seen work best.
Yeah, see, all the things that I did that I wrote about in my book were things that I just did to survive for the last 15 years. They were not something I ever wanted to put out there for the world to see. I wasn't in a place with the proper support to be able to put myself out there like that. But it wasn't until the suicide of my best friend that I kind of got this call to do this thing. And what I'd been doing for a long time is three things, and I'll talk about the last two of the three things first. And that's first was journaling, and that's just creating a space. Whether I write in journals, some people can do video or audio journaling, but really what that is cognitive processing. How am I thinking about what I'm thinking about? And that has a huge effect on my capacity to be a dad, to be a husband, to be a worker, to be safe, to be aware of, like Brian, you talk about all the time, like when you wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror and you say, somebody might try to kill you today. It's this idea of that, think about what you're thinking about, and then, kind of judge those thoughts in a way. It's like, should I discard them or should I keep them? So journaling is a great place, a safe space to challenge different concepts that I have, because I think we all kind of come in this world, we all kind of have prejudices, whether it's related to somebody's gender, sexual orientation, their weight, their hair or lack thereof. It's when something makes somebody different than ourselves, we categorize them and we put them into a bucket that's either higher or lower than us, whatever. But a journal is a safe place to say, you know what, I do think this way, but it doesn't affect or impact how I treat people. And it's not a way that I want to be. And it just helps me think through a lot of the twisted feelings that I have that are not true. And I can put it out there. And a lot of times I can just like be my own therapist in my journal and say, this is what I'm thinking, but this is what I want to think about this. So that's been, it referred to a journal, and there's been tons of scientific studies, specifically the University of Iowa has done some really great research in how it's affected tennis players, how it's affected people with like finances and all of that other stuff. It's fantastic. And a keystone habit is just a really foundational habit that other great habits can be built on. And so that's been huge for me. I've got like 25 journals here back to my right, where, spanning from 2004. I remember this last February 22nd, I remember the date, and I was thinking, I wonder how back, because I don't journal every day, I just journal when I feel like it. And there's a wonderful chapter in my book about rules for journaling. It's 3 pages of nothing, blankness, but it's a great principle. Like, hey, it is what you make it. And I remember going back to look, it's February 22nd. I was like, wonder how far back on February 22nd I can go back and see what I said. 2004, I go back and I have this problem in my journal that I don't have any recollection of. And it's like, wow, where did that go? And how encouraging is that to say that thing that was such a big deal to me back in 2004 doesn't even register an ounce in my stress sphere right now.
Hugely important.
So that's encouraging, and journaling is a great place to encourage yourself and to think about ways to encourage and be a better part of your community. The other thing that's really powerful is the way I do friendship. And I can't spend a lot of time talking about this, but I've created, like an onion has layers. I've created layers of friendships that specifically for my best friends. There is an intentional way, a covenant of sorts that I make every Thanksgiving with a group of people that so there's an understanding of what they can expect from me and what I can expect from them. I never force them into it. I just invite them into it. And if they're willing and they have the time, it simplifies life so much. So like when you have, I mean, people that are listening to this podcast and you guys, the stresses in your job, whether related to past experience or current experience, you know, it's a lot already. But having to deal with, like, who do I buy gifts for? Who do I call when my tire breaks? You know, my tire goes flat. You know, who all this stuff. Like, I've taken the guessing game out of that. I have a layer of friendships that I know where to turn. They expect me to go to these friends, what I call intentional best friends. There's 130 pages about it because there's not a whole lot of books out there to talk about friendship. And let's be honest, guys, this especially people in our community that are listening right now, we really need to do friendship well, because nothing else will really matter very much if you don't have that community support. I would say that friendship is the most foundational part of everything that I do, because they hold me accountable to all of the things that are really important. Which takes me to the first tool, which is my mental health scale. And what this is this is a really simple, like butt ugly, simple, stupid way to communicate with professionals, loved ones, to say, this is where I am and this is what I need, by saying one thing. And what you'll find is, if you, even right now, you're listening to this, if you Google mental health scales, you're going to find a variety of things. But one of the first 5 things you'll find is what I call the positive 1 scale, which is, you know, 1 is really great and 10 is bad, or the positive 10 scale, 10 is really great and 1 is bad. And my son, in the same sitting at a hospital, was given both scales on 2 different sheets of paper as we're talking about possibly having them put into hospital. And you're like, when you're in the middle of that storm and you're just trying to get through that storm, how do you communicate with the people you love, or with a professional, law enforcement or whatever, EMS, doesn't matter, and say, this is what I need, this is where I'm at, this is what I need. And the fact that we don't have a universal language to say that's pretty bad on our part. You know, there was a Mars mission that happened, I think it was 2006, where Lockheed Martin made the system so that it communicated in the metric system, and NASA was using the imperial system. So they send the information over, you know, to land, to orbit Mars in the imperial system. The orbiter interprets it as the metric system. $6 million down the drain, it crashes on Mars. You know, and we're how often are we doing that right now to ourselves, where we can't? It's just hard for us in general to open up and tell people how we feel. But we make it so much more difficult when we're all speaking a different language. And I try to simplify that.
No, and does that have to do with your Joe scale?
Yeah, that's my Joe scale. Well, I wanted to make it sound more official. So I call it the Universal Mental Health Scale, and I'm doing some work to get that there.
But that's the thing, is like that, to me, if you're going, like, if someone walks up and goes, "Hey, here's the Universal Mental Health Scale," I'm gonna be like, "All right, I'm already like, what's going on here?" Like, "Hey, dude, I'm gonna teach you the Joe scale." I'm like, "All right, I don't know who this Joe guy is, but I bet I can relate to him." You know what I mean? So,
that's great.
That's great. I take that to heart.
So I've got like a page of notes. This is all Joe notes, just so you know. So that goes with your Joe scale. So I'm going to dive into it real fast because you said some stuff that is just amazing. And first of all, I need everybody to listen, to make sure that you order the book and you check out the website and you read up on Joe Reid, basically because he's one of the most resilient human beings you'll ever meet. Why? Because nobody on the face of the planet has tried to kill himself more than Joe has over the years, or thought about suicide daily like Joe has. And he's still there, and he's still punching and kicking and scratching, and he's still there at the end of the phone to help you, or at the end of email help you. So remember, resilience starts here. Second, you said something about perspective, which is amazing. And you talked about stepping back with the art. So I'm a huge Surratt fan, and I like to do the Ferris Bueller and start with my nose right on the canvas and to take a step back and then take a step back. And then that pointillism starts catching up to you and you're like, oh my gosh, I missed all of this. Almost all of our life is like that dream catcher where we're so busy going in different directions. We never take that step back and go, what a beautiful dream catcher. So I love that you bring that up, because that coupled with what Brian said about us standing at the 13th floor of a hotel in Bogota between some really high pressure meetings and taking a look out and remembering who we're here for and what it is that we're doing, that's hugely important. I also would add Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yes.
Not about what you talk about with having the toolkit already on board.
Yeah.
And then real quickly, one, I love that you add the in your blogs. The other thing on the website, folks, and Brian will list all the links to the website. There's a lot of blogs on there, and you'll associate with a bunch of them. I don't understand blogs really, but I understood the one that I deep dived into, which and I'm paraphrasing now because I don't have it in front of me. And it was, look, I can't cure you and me. I'm so messed up right now that I can't take care of both of us. And that's why Brian and I are enablers and also best friends, is because we identify in each other our weaknesses and we constantly bring it up, which goes to my final point of that note taken is your scale. So I'll tell you this, Shelly, our CEO, we're on the West Coast and a horrific injury occurs. Shelly falls for about 11 feet and tense her elbow and dislocates her shoulder, all in like nanoseconds. So it's probably one of the most painful injuries that you can imagine if you know what I'm talking about. Folks on this call do. We get to the emergency room, and because it's California, there's 4 people in the little treatment room where Shelly is, separated only by these little flimsy curtains. So 3 of the people that are in there for like a splinter, a stomach ache, and they stubbed their toe. Shelly's in there with all this shit turning black and blue and her eyes rolling around in her head. And so the same doctor goes to each one of the 4 people with this little scale with smiley faces. And the very first one with the splinter, where are you? It's an 8, doc. The very second person with the stub toe, where is it? It's a 9, doc. The very third person with the stomach ache, oh my gosh, just a 10. Gets to Shelly, who is having a hard time breathing because there's so much pain. And they're making me sign this form that, look, we got to put her out and it might kill her, right? To get all this stuff back together. They look at Shelly and she bites her lip and she points at the 2 and she goes, I don't know, fucking 2 or 3. 2, I think. Okay. And I laughed my ass off. Now that's the first part of the scale. Second part of that is Shelly was involved in a on-duty fatal shooting. And so they made it mandatory. It wasn't mandatory, but they made it mandatory back then, right around that same time, that you had to seek mental health and counseling and go to a therapist before you got back on the road. And so I had to drive Shelly to St. Clair Shores. That was the closest place that had the therapy. They gave Shelly a scale and she came outside in tears. And I've seen Shelly cry twice, and we've been married 40 years. Okay. The thing was that the scale that they had, did you lose a baby? Did you have an abortion? Are you on heroin? This, that, the other? Did you, get beaten up by your husband or significant other? Are you now on the tether program? She's got to fill this out before she even sees the therapist. And you know what that feels a lot like? That feels a lot like getting judged, right? So listen, if you're in my head and I have these horrific auditory hallucinations, I get in a really bad place sometimes and I need help getting out. And I'm screaming for help, and sometimes there's nobody around here to listen. Last thing I want is somebody to shove this pseudo-scientific list of potential anomalous behavior in my face. That certainly doesn't help. So I know about the coma cocktail. I know all about Thorazine and all the different stuff they can zap you with, and the Be Nice chair that they strap you down into. It's got to be hard to get up and walk across the street and say, I need therapy, or go to the emergency room and I need help. So that long preamble was it, what motivates you? Because there's a lot of opportunities that I missed where I should have gone. And now I kick myself thinking I could have been further ahead, right? So how do you know when you're getting manic? How do you know? What would you suggest to somebody else to be that warning to go and get help? Because I'll tell you, folks, the very first thing on your site is the most amazing thing in the world. On the left, it says, I'm the one having trouble. I'm paraphrasing again. On the right, it says, I know somebody having trouble. And right between the two is, hey, if you need help, dial 911. Okay. And I sat there looking, not knowing which button to click. and that was just doing the research for the show. So how do you cope with that, Joe? How do you know when it's time?
Yeah, I got a couple of stories to kind of answer that question. I had a friend that traveled to Ireland was last month and ended up getting a knee infection. And his wife is a therapist. He was traveling with a nurse. And something about the way that the infection traveled through his body, he ended up in psychosis. And the only thing he could say to his wife, because they didn't know what was going on, is, hey, tell Joe I'm at a -7. Now, when you read my book, this will make a lot more sense to you. But she knew right away, because that's all he could say that made any sense. Everything else was just gobbledygook. When he said that, he's like, oh, we got to get him to the hospital now. So there's a thing called a crisis number. And as I approach that crisis number, there are coping skills, and it's to the left of the scale. So if I'm, the scale is -10 to 10. It's stupid simple. 0 is the, I don't know how I'm doing. If you're feeling negative, guess what? You're on the negative side of the scale. It's just a matter to what degree. And a lot of us have different tolerances for different things. So my crisis number may be different than yours. But as I approach that crisis number, then I know there are certain things I have to implement in my life to be able to move myself in the right direction. But there's also that manic number, which really takes a ton of emotional intelligence, which is why it's so important that when you're doing well, it's important to do more things for yourself that will help yourself be better. So yeah, when I and this is what's faulty about other scales too, because there's not a whole lot of room to feel good. Most of the scales are like, yeah, you're feeling bad at 7 and below, but you got these 3 numbers that are feeling good. Well, for me, a lot of times being manic feels really, really great. And I want to do all this stuff. And it's not till I realize that I'm sitting there reflecting and doing that cognitive work in my head, that mindfulness, where I can say, you know what? Am I being rational? Am I approaching that manic number, or am I just really in a good mood? And I think a lot of times when people approach mania, they start to tank right away just because of the fear of approaching mania.
Yep.
And what I encourage people to do is like, no, don't be afraid of that. Like, grasp those feelings, enjoy those feelings. But there's this concept that's called coping ahead. If you think you're going to approach something and you think you're going to run across something that's difficult, what are you going to do when that happens? If there's a storm that may be coming, what are you going to do when that storm hits? And think about all the different scenarios. And I know you guys talk about tactics all the time. You address scenario-based training all the time, and just bring that home to what is more important. Like, literally, one of the phrases I use with officers when I do the training is, if you don't take care of you, this is the only phrase I use with officers. If you don't take care of you, you can't take care of me, and I need you. And imagine who that me is in your life. It's your partner. Yes, it could be me, but it could be your wife and your children. It could be, an organization that you're part of that really depends on you. And you're not going to be worth a grain of salt if you're not taking care of you. And knowing how to communicate and knowing where you're at and what you need, which is really what the scale is all about, and be able to communicate those needs. It's just something I've learned over 20 years. Like I use this scale to describe my wife's cooking. If it's, my crisis number for my wife's cooking, if it's a -6, I got to go to the hospital. It's a bad meal. It's that bad, and I'm just using this in every walk of life. It's something that when you use it for one thing, you use it for all the other things, and it becomes, it becomes easy to use. And that's how my friend, when he was in psychosis, they thought he was going to die. He wasn't going to die, but it was just really bad. He ended up staying in Ireland for 3 weeks, no expense paid at the hospital, which is awful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, how did you get into, or maybe did it just come naturally? Like, how did you end up then starting to talk to, like, on the law enforcement, first responder side? Because you were, you had that sort of background for, like you said, like a week, but then, fast forward all this time.
Experience.
Yeah. Fast forward, 15 years later, or however long it was before you started talking, to be like, how did you end up there? Because it seems like you've resonated with that community a little bit more. Now, I can't be because of something you did, obviously, like on the job or something with law enforcement experience. It was all of this other experience, really. So do you know what it is? Do you even know? Do you think it's, what was that?
Sure. It's God's sense of humor.
Okay.
I mean, I talk about officers all the time about how I firmly believe that God doesn't waste anything. Anything in your past, anything you've been through is an opportunity to go to and help somebody else. And when I started Broken People, which is my international organization, I wanted to partner with another organization because I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. Like I didn't want to be like, there's so much competition in nonprofits out there. And I just feel like that's just idiotic. Let's support each other. So I got in touch with National Alliance of Mental Illness. I got in touch with one here in Kent County. And I said, hey, what can I do to help? How can my organization partner with your organization just to make things better? And it just came about that there was, they do this, they're part of the CIT training. They show up for those things. And there's this new training program here where I connected with the director of the police academy at Grand Valley State University, where they're just trying to do some de-escalation training for emotional crises with the recruits in the police academy, as well as in-service officers. In fact, I'm going to Gaylord, Northern Michigan next week to do the same kind of training. And when they invited me, they had no idea what they were going to get. They had no idea that I had any police experience. And I was frightened. Like, it was kind of like, oh, they would make them talk to police officers about my struggle. Well, how can I not bring up the fact that I used to be a police officer? And I tell you, as I lead up to this explanation that I used to be a police officer, I pop up a picture of my wife and me and my daughter, who was a baby at the time. And I talk about all these struggles of different people, of people in my group, of broken people, like trichotillomania, which is a hair pulling disorder. Person in my group used to think that their wife was an alien, that she was out to kill him. And I go through this long list of struggles. And then I say, hey, by the way, this is all about me. And then I pop up a picture of me as a law enforcement officer, my day of I got sworn in. And then it starts to resonate on them with a whole nother level. Like I see their jaw drop and I see them like refocus on me in a different way. And it's God's sense of humor. And the fact that they keep calling me back, I think is because one of the feedback surveys that they did, the training wasn't going very well. It's a 2-day training that they do. And one of the surveys said, Joe saved the training because they were just so, you get a lot of seasoned officers, I think, and they get into situations and they're like, oh, we know this stuff. And, it's not until they bring something in there and rattle the cage a little bit and kind of bring it home where I make it about them and less about me, that it really starts to have an impact. And I think my first speech at Grand Valley, like that caught everybody off guard. And the other thing is too, people from my community donate books to police officers. So when I go to present to police officers, I ask for people all over the country, hey, would you be willing to, submit some money and donate a book to police officers? And when I walk in there with a box full of my books and with a message from somebody that wanted to send them a little message of encouragement in a culture and in a culture that law enforcement is right now, where there's a lot of it's a tough space to be.
Yeah.
And to know that there's somebody like them that used to be in their shoes for a week, but mind you, I knew a little bit. I went through a lot of training, and to be able to be so vulnerable and to give them a space to be vulnerable. It's somehow that's resonating with them. And you know what, as long as they keep inviting me, I'm going to keep showing up.
Well, that's the ultimate when you go to groups like that. I mean, we're the same way with, anytime it's like law enforcement, military, or some professional group kind of at the edge of something at a very, they'll be the first ones to not call you back. They'll be the first group of people that go, hey, thank you. And then you'll never hear from them again. So I think the fact that they're calling back means exactly what you just explained, is you're touching on something that they're all getting and seeing. And I think, that, like you said, that day in, day out, and then now I got to see this when I come home from work on the news of, how effed up the police are and let's defund this. And, you think back to like yourself when, hey, you're just some kid who said, hey, I want to go help people and I want to look cool in a uniform and I want to do this good for my community. And then now you fast forward years later and this is where you're at. It's like, because it's happened so slowly over time, it's like you brought up, you don't realize where you're at. I mean, and you talk about mental health and going to therapy, and that can mean a lot of different things to people, but until they start making it mandatory in those professions, because then it gets rid of the stigma, because there's no, oh, so-and-so went and saw, and is having issues. It's like, well, no, we all have to go. So there's no getting around it until, I think it's going to be tough, because what does it take? It takes someone to make an individual choice on themselves to go, man, look at where I'm at. So, I know you and then even on our show, sometimes Greg and I, we always share different stories or different experiences and just to get it out there, because, someone, like we said, with these podcasts. So one, if you're still listening, we're 50 minutes into this conversation, it means it resonated with you too, because when we talk about some of these issues on the show, they get like the least amount of listens out of our other shows, but they also still get, a higher rate of feedback then, because
a profound feedback.
hey,
I would agree.
I really appreciate that. This resonated in me. This is why, like, rather than just that was a really cool episode and I learned this. And it was just more like, no, I get it. So obviously everyone out there gets it in some way, or the overwhelming majority, but we're still kind of not quite able to be as open and honest as we can be. And I think, kind of like you talked about earlier, like a lot of people don't know how to communicate it, especially guys. Like I was the worst. Like I communication to me has been a long process to learn, and continues every day, especially with the house full of girls that I have here. And, just like figuring things out, like the 9-year-old, she comes out, we just have one, but I say a house full of girls. Got my wife, the 9-year-old insurgent, and the dog are all girls. So it's like, but like the little one comes out with something that's like, I'm trying to get her somewhere, and this, whatever's happening is the worst thing to happen in her life. And I'm trying to explain how, no, it's not, and de-escalate the situation. But it's like you said, like, if I don't have the skills to do that, what am I going to do? I'm going to do what I've learned to do. So I'm going to come off the top rope and yell and take this stuff away. And so those little moments, even though that might work for that second, what does that cost to me and to her especially, but even for me for the rest of my day, and then the rest of the week, and then the rest of the month, and then the rest of the year. Like, so it's those little things to go, okay, this is one of those moments. How do I want to handle this right now? And that alone is kind of like a check on your own thoughts and feelings and emotional reaction in the moment. But learning, like you said, to communicate that is difficult. It's difficult for guys too.
Well, one of the things I read, Joe, that I'd like you to talk about for a minute, if you got the time. I've been turning victims into opponents since the late 70s. And back then I used to write on the dry erase board all the time in the dojo. First, you learn your boundaries, then you test your boundaries, then you push your boundaries. And it was a way for people to understand coping skills when they were dealing with other broken humans. You talk a lot about boundaries. You also talk about that your love for other humans can wear you out. And that's where I think you found your need for boundaries and to reinforce and enforce them. Can you talk a little bit how you see boundaries in your work?
Yeah. So one of the things that really clicked with me when my friend passed away, I saw very clearly it was just this lack of boundaries. Like he was just pouring, he'd show up for you at midnight, 3 a.m. Like I got out of the hospital in 2013, a mental hospital, and he was there for me whenever I called. But he had 8 adopted kids and he had a marriage, and, he was, his cup was empty. And, where else can you go when your cup is empty other than just shattered and broken? And when you think about a broken glass, it's really hard to put back together. It's possible, but it's really hard. One of the ways I refer to the boundaries in my book is this. I'm a kind of an aficionado of chocolate milk. I love chocolate milk. I go to the bar, I order chocolate milk. It's my thing. And you think about, pouring getting a gallon of that your favorite True Moo, brown cow moo, whatever, and pouring it on the counter, you're not going to do that because you're going to waste it. You're going to make a mess and it's going to scatter all over the place. So we have this idea of like, I want to create a boundary for this chocolate milk so I can enjoy it more. So I pour it into a cup and then I can enjoy it more. You think about in terms of like the guitar. If you have no boundaries in the guitar, you're just going to be plumbing this, strumming the same chord over and over again. It's not going to be music. But when you move your fingers up and down the fret and you create boundaries for every string, you'll be able to create beautiful music. And it's through our boundaries that we really find freedom. We really find the joy of life because it's contained. And yeah, that's what I think. And one of the major ways I've done this, Greg, is with my friendships and
Right.
knowing who I can say no to, knowing that it's okay to say no, and especially with my intentional best friends, like I used to call my 10 friends, knowing that if I'm going to say yes to anybody, it's going to be them, and I'm okay saying no to everybody else. The other thing is, and Brian, you were mentioning on this, is this idea of growth and how small and important growth is. And I got a picture of like a little baby Greg, if I can use you as an example.
Of course.
And now you've got this slightly grown up Greg. And in order for you to get from that baby to where you are right now, if you wanted to hurry that growth up and you wanted to be the Greg presence that you are right now, you'd have to tear that baby limb for limb to stretch it. And it just doesn't happen, right? So that growth has opened over, like, what are you, 36, 37? Over the course of 37 years.
Almost 40, yeah.
Yeah. And like, Brian, you talk about the frustration you have with your wife and kids. Sometimes, like, those are situational opportunities for personal growth.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Every time you come across a tactical problem or an opportunity to cope ahead, it's like when you're a kid and you're eating your vegetables. It's just another decision that's going to make the little Joe, the little Greg, the little Brian grow up to be the healthier Joe, the healthier parent, the better police officer. The study done in in Buffalo, New York in 2016 said that the life expectancy of police officers this was done between white police officers, was 21.9 years less than the average white life expectancy of the white male in Buffalo, New York. And why is that? Right?
Yeah,
it's you don't think that stress has an impact? You don't think that every little choice, when you make a choice and you hang up this call and you're going to decide if I'm going to grab a whiskey and just drink the rest of the night, or I'm going to drink some water, you don't think that every single choice you has is has a right and a wrong, a good and a bad?
Exactly.
It's okay to have fun. It's okay to enjoy certain things in moderation with boundaries. Hey, we talked about that. All of these little choices will be judged by that 80-year-old Greg and that 80-year-old Brian. And what do you want them to be thankful for you?
Right.
Will you even be around at 80? What about your wife and kids? I don't know. And it's those things. Think about it, like proximity. It's the things that are closest to you, literally in proximity, that should be the most important. And that should be your wife and kids, your relationship with God, your friends, your home, your community. Like when I was in Kosovo, like the thought that there's so much pain in this world,
right,
and I can't do jack squat about it. I mean, I'm just trying to get my kids to go to school.
Right.
Yeah.
I think all the noise that's out there, especially with social media, makes it all worse, right? Because it gives this appearance, that overwhelming feeling, and then you get helpless because you're like, well, I can't deal with this. How do I understand all of these issues? Look at what's going on. I mean, and we're bombarded with that stuff, and you just nailed it. When you said, well, what's in close proximity to you? What can you do? I mean, that's my whole thing, is what I take with the insurgent too. It's like, do I want to go out and nerf the world and try to make sure she never has any bad experiences and try to change how people are and the way they treat her and everything? Or I can just, increase her ability to deal with the overall struggle that is life. So how do I make her more resilient so that it doesn't matter what she faces, right? It's going to make she's going to be able to handle it. And that makes her stronger, which means it makes the people she's around stronger, which means it makes the community stronger, so you start to multiply those benefits as they go out. It increases exponentially over time if you're doing that. So it's like, what can I do right now? Well, I'm literally looking at my yard going like, damn, that's a lot of weeds out there.
Oh yes.
Like,
yes, same.
I gotta clean all that stuff up. What can I? Well, I don't have time, but you know what? I can do that part right there today and get that done with. I know I can do that, and it's like, okay, well, now we're getting somewhere. So that proximity thing is close, and it's funny how it relates to something we talk about or our courses called proximity negates skill. Now, the idea is it's more, if I'm facing you, let's say you're my opponent, Joe, in whatever situation, I could be the biggest, baddest, most highly trained person in the world. But if you're 6 inches from me, hey, you know who's going to win that fight? Whoever comes out on top, because the closer you are to me, the easier it is for you to hurt me or do me harm. But the other side of that coin is true. So the closer you are to me, the easier it is for me to do good or help or do it. So having that connection and that close group of people, it's like, just focus on literally as far as you can stretch your arm out, start there, right? I mean, that's really all it takes sometimes. So, you come at it from a different angle, but I think that's why we clicked on our last call when we first met, is because, we have such we're all, using different terms maybe sometimes, or talking about a different subject, but we're talking about it in the same manner. Does that kind of make sense, Greg? I don't know.
Yeah. So here's the thing, Joe. I'll issue a challenge. Let's collaborate on something by the end of the year. Let's put something together where we're all together helping people, because I like the cut of your jib. I think you're a practical, resilient guy.
You're a peach, hon.
Exactly.
Thanks,
no, I think you're a practical, resilient guy. And I think that anybody that looks at the website, I think that anybody that gets a book is going to find themselves humbled by your path and the path that you chose and sometimes didn't. And they're going to learn a lot about themselves. And if I could say that about me, if that was my legacy, then I would be proud. I will tell you this as well. My dad's dying words, a lot of people's dying words are, my dad came through and grabbed me as hard as he could and said, never say coulda, woulda, shoulda. And it's taken me 60 years to understand exactly what Dad meant. But Joe, you live your life by that ethos. And Brian, I can't stress the practical levels of resilience that we got to talk about on the show. It was amazing. And Joe, we knew from the first time we talked that there was something special about you, but now it's even more obvious that people need to reach out to you to talk to you about their story and talk more about yours.
That's an honor. Yeah, and I think it's really important to, when people like you and I, and then those that are listening, we have the capacity, because we have healthy support systems, to be a little bit more vulnerable. And I think it's important to point out the fact that I have support systems in such a way that I can be here right now sharing so openly. Not everybody can or should be.
You're right.
But when you have a situation when you're on a platform, like police officers are often, put on platforms, not of their own doing, but because what society puts them there, or pastors or teachers. And when there isn't that sense of vulnerability, when there isn't that sense of, hey, I'm human too, then it can make those that are not on the platform misjudge reality and say that I'm not good enough and I'll never be good enough because so-and-so acts this way. And that's one of the things I've always done, is compare myself to other people because of what I assume their life is like, or what I assume their challenges are like. When in all reality, we all face pretty much the same thing. It's just a matter about, how open are we to share it? How embarrassed are we of the struggles that we have to open up about it?
Right.
And that, I hate the word stigma. There should be a stigma around the word stigma, but it does perpetuate the word. No, seriously, I hate it.
No, you're
it's
exactly
a great
right.
point. It's
a
great point.
So simple.
Yeah, if I can talk about it, it makes it easier for you to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then it takes the scary away. Talk about exposure therapy, right? It's all up. That's what it's been for me.
No, we appreciate you talking about this, and I'm gonna have all the for you listening, all the links to get a hold of you and to your book and your website and everything are gonna be in the episode details. And so if you're listening, and you can always reach out, but you can also share this sometimes. One of the ways that I've communicated with friends before in the past is by literally sending them things, something like this, whether it's a podcast episode or an article or something, and gone, just, oh, hey man, you got to check this out. And then, they'll, without thinking about it, dive in and get a few minutes in and be like, hey, wait a minute, are you all right? Was this like a message? Like, no, you know what I mean? Just, and they'll like, got it. Okay. You know what I'm
or
saying?
even a song, Yeah.
Oh, it's a perfect example. And I know music and your music in general is the great. There was one universal thing to unite all humans. It's absolutely music, because there's so many similarities cross culturally about different types of music. But yeah, and that's one of those things I like to do, like, hey, check this out. And it's almost like a passive way of just throwing something across someone's bow. And I think conversations are good to this is why I love podcasts, and they're so popular now, because it's just if you find one that's an open, honest conversation, man, you get a lot of value out of it for not having to pay anything. So I always like to throw that out there. And Greg, I know you had something else you wanted to add.
No, I just wanted to say that the divine intervention, I truly believe it. In 45 minutes, we got a call with Abigail Manning. The first person I wrote down that I'm going to send your information to, Joe, after talking to you today specifically, is Abigail Manning. Do me a favor, look for that name. Make sure you look her up. You guys connect. I think together, Brian and I can do a lot in the LE first responders realm to get your message further out there. I think that's this podcast was an important first step. I really do.
Yeah. And I'm just, the fact that we're just here talking, the three of us, and people are just kind of zooming in from the background listening, this is what it's about, being here.
It really is. It truly is. Being in this moment right now with this message. That's wonderful.
All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on, Joe, and appreciate everyone for listening. Again, remember, everyone, you can check out the episode details. We'll have even more stuff on our Patreon site if you haven't checked that out, but check out what Joseph's got going on and his book. I like his approach. I don't always like a lot of people's approach, but I like yours because it works for me. So if it works for me, it can work for anyone.
At least you're not biased whatsoever. That's Brian, folks. That's Brian being vulnerable right there. Take it or leave it.
No, I know it's all about growth, but some approaches I just kind of resonate with me right off the bat, so I find it easier to get into, and that's definitely how you are with stuff, and that's who you are. So Joseph, man, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story and talking to us.
It's an honor, absolute honor, guys.
Well, thank you, and everyone listening, don't forget, training changes behavior.